All right. Hello. We started our last section here. You're going to get four, maybe five videos. They'll be, if they're four, they'll be longer. If they're five, they'll be shorter. On the next outline, it's the last one. It's under the module called Market Problems, and we're only gonna do some of this. Okay. So when you get that out, if you get that out, we're going to do some stuff on the back, and basically we're going to talk about things that happen in markets that aren't really supposed to, the problems they cause, and then how government solves them. And sometimes when government solves them, it doesn't always solve them or creates other problems. We've talked about unintended consequences before. Okay? So anyway, what we're going to be doing is, if you look at your outline, let me get this thing out, my version. On the front, here we go. Sorry about that. On the front, it's going to look like this. Okay? And on the back, which is where we're going to go, it's going to look like this. So if I hold it closely, we're going to do numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that'll be it for us. Okay? 2, 3, 4, and 5. So today I want to focus on 1. And 1 might take a little longer simply because it's kind of a double thing. Anyway, the one of the problems that almost always happens in a market if it's left alone is what's called imperfect competition. If you think about whether it's, you got 3 restaurants in a town and one of them does better than the others, then they start dominating and they run the other ones out of business, and then they get to do what they want. Or if you've got 2 of the restaurants are bigger than the third, those 2 might sort of like secretly talk and knock the other one out of business or do things to try to cause them problems. Those are both examples of imperfect competition. Okay, so we're going to focus on what monopoly, which you've all heard of, and something called oligopoly, which I'm guessing you've not, but you will. So if we get done with monopoly and oligopoly today, great. If we don't just get monopoly, that's fine. So here we go. So basically the first thing is, with a monopoly, is where one company controls, and the key word is controls. What does it mean to control? Does Apple control cell phones? Does, McDonald's control fast food? Well, not really. Okay. Control is a word that's tough to define, but we're gonna sort of, when we get down here, we're gonna talk about further narrowing down what exactly that means. Okay. But when you think about monopolies in the past, think about Standard Oil with Rockefeller. They broke that company up. AT&T got broken up. Other companies have been disciplined, like Carnegie Steel and so on and so forth. So, under imperfect competition, first thing we're going to put here is simply what a monopoly is. And then, down here, you got a little more detail. And I'll hold this. You can pause and get the notes if you like. Hopefully you can read that okay. These are the criteria that government would use to determine if a company is a monopoly. And if a company is a monopoly, then we've got a problem, and they have to deal with it, which we'll talk about as well. Okay? So the 3 criteria that are used. Number 1, does the company have a high market share? And they don't use a number because it could differ. If you think about something like fast food, a really high market share might be 35 or 40 because there's so many companies. If you think about something like, maybe tractors, but more likely things like jets, like Boeing, which I'm going to use as an example here. Why don't a lot of companies make jets? Because it's difficult to do, and you don't want just anybody making jets, and so on and so forth. So it depends on the industry, but I just use the example of 60%, which you don't see very many companies. But some companies that would be 60% or more in their industry would be Microsoft in Windows and operating systems, and also in office productivity software. But it's not as big a deal because, you got Chrome, you've got phones that you don't use your computers nearly as much as you do did that as not me, but 10, 15 years ago. Um, Intel, I didn't put on here as another one, the chips for computers, but again, it's kind of the same thing. They don't dominate in phones. So if you dominate in this little guy, that's something else. Boeing, I mentioned before, big time in passenger aircraft, large passenger aircraft. Cisco Systems, if you've not heard of them, they make routers. Biggest maker of routers in the world. Starbucks comes to mind. If you're talking about chain coffee houses, it's not really an industry. They call it, I forget what they call it, ready to eat food or something like that. But companies that dominate. But notice names not on here: Nike, McDonald's, Disney. They're not on there because they don't have 60%. So they're not really that much of a concern. The second criteria is low number of competitors. How many people are in the industry? Okay, fast food, you do in your head, go down Scatterfield Road from Meyer all the way down to the dearly departed Mounds Mall. How many chain restaurants are there? It's ridiculous. How many chain restaurants are there not? It's probably a better question. So you don't have that problem in fast food. You don't have that problem in athletic shoes or clothing brands or anything like that. But you do not have very many companies that make operating systems. There's Microsoft that makes Windows, Apple makes iOS, and for you nerds, you got Linux, and you've got other ones that some of you, Chrome OS and so on. Boeing, there's only one other company that makes large passenger jets, and that is Airbus. It's not even American. Cisco, there's a couple. You probably have at your house, if you have a router, like Linksys, which is Cisco, Netgear, which is what I've got, Asus, there's a couple others. But as far as the big servers and all that stuff, that Cisco dominates. And then Starbucks, I defy you to name me a large chain that's just like Starbucks. Those are not really out there. So when you get both of those together, then the government starts looking, this is a problem. Which takes us to the third criteria, which is the most important one, which is a behavioral criteria. And this is a term that I'm going to show it to you again. It's called high barriers to entry. Okay? High barriers to entry. And the definition, I'm going to read it to you even though you've got it down here. Barriers to entry is simply a natural or artificial impediment to market entry or growth. So to explain that with an example or two, think about, if Starbucks wanted to locate in Pendleton, what would they do to try to knock Falls Perk out of business? What could they do? They could do lots of things, okay? Those are artificial. So think of two different things. But if you're thinking, let's say you decide that you want to open a department store, discount department store, selling a bunch of different items, clothes, food, health and beauty aids, shampoo, drugs, toothpaste, et cetera, all that stuff. And you decide you want to locate it right between a Walmart and a Meijer. And you're like, I'm going to beat these guys. No, you're not. No, you are not. It's not going to happen. Okay? Because you can't. Because they have scale on you. If you remember economies of scale from the last section, they're going to be able to buy and sell so much. So the mere presence of them should scare you out of that market. That's a natural barrier. It's like, I don't know, gentlemen, I'll stereotype this. You're in a bar and you see this glorious woman over across the way. It's like, oh my gosh, she's so beautiful. I'm going to go talk to her. And as you go talk to her, you see her boyfriend or her husband or whoever it is, who's like 6'8", 320. And he stands right in front of her and he looks at you. He is a natural barrier. Okay? And then if you try to keep going forward, he cocks his fist back or he flexes or he does whatever. That's an artificial barrier. He's doing something to stop you, or he'll put his arm out and you run into it or whatever. So natural barriers would be scale, simple size, complexity. Why don't a lot of companies make jets? Because it's really difficult. And do you want just anybody making a jet? Because, hey, we got really cheap flights because we just made our own jets. Oh, well, how much do you value your life there? Obviously, airlines keep flights cheap by making smaller seats and taking away food and taking away, blankets, just little things you don't even probably notice because they don't exist anymore, but they used to. Anyway, artificial barriers would be also scale by using it. If you try to open that, like with false perk, let's go back to that. Starbucks could easily set their prices so low that false perk can't compete because false perk's buying 10 billion tons of coffee and false perk's buying little bitty bits, which we've already talked about that with scale. And you guys answered well about some of those, about, I'm the hometown guy, I have higher quality. It's a part of Pendleton's, spirit and so on and so forth. But underpricing would be a good example of an artificial barrier. If you want to get mean, sabotage. They could come in and poison the coffee or whatever, I suppose, if they wanted to. Bribing the zoning board to, hey, you can't build there, it's a floodplain or it's a wild animal crossing or whatever. All of these things can and do happen in what are called pure markets where there's no government involvement. Okay? All right, I don't beat this to death, but so those three things together, if you have high market share, low number of competitors, and the company starts doing things that artificially suppress competition, then the government starts taking a look, and you've got arguably what's a monopoly. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another video just to break this up a bit, talk about oligopoly, and then talk about how government handles both of them. They handle them both roughly the same. Okay? So, good day.